So get this. Your customers just stopped wanting things. Not because they're broke, not because they're disciplined, because a diabetes drug turned down the volume on desire itself. And if your business model depends on impulse, craving, or compulsion, you need to pay attention.
So get this, John. Do you remember back in the fall of 2024, people were just coming off the Paris Olympics, Biden was still president, AI was finding its footing, and we started to talk to people about the strange weight loss drug, Ozempic. In 24, we heard and saw high interest in GLP-1s. Also some surprising knockoff effects. People were reporting less drinking, less gambling, less compulsive scrolling. And now we're seeing clinical evidence, particularly around alcohol, that these drugs are acting on the brain's dopamine reward pathways, essentially dialing down the signal that makes it hard to say no. It's still early, the science isn't settled for every behavior, but the direction is clear that this isn't just a weight loss story anymore. And when we talk to people and interview them about GLP-1s, they keep using this word that holds on, which is quieter. Not thinner, not healthier, but quieter, less food noise, less pulling to the urges of every day. And we started thinking about that, right? The humming of the want that most of us have playing in the background. And on GLP-1s, it's getting quieter. So we wanted to look into that. What does it look like, the numbers from 2024 to today?
Yeah, Libby, I think this is a really interesting topic because what we found was enormous. And we're calling it the Great Quiet.
Yeah, look, here's some numbers. 54% of millennials have either taken or are considering taking a GLP-1.
Yeah, Libby, and it's not just for weight. It is, as you say, it's for the quiet. And this one floored me. 64% of parents with kids under 18 have either taken a GLP-1 or are considering them.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me because we've been calling these parents crispy parents for years. Overwhelmed, burnt out, running on fumes, stress eating through bedtime routines. Like I'm this person, so I understand. Pouring wine to take off the edge and scrolling to numb out after the kids are finally asleep. And the people aren't hiding it. 84% of people who take GLP-1s are willing to tell anyone that they're on the medication. So this is very Serena Williams of this fall. Right. No shame, no whispers, and no justification.
And that's the real big flip, isn't it? You know, this sense now that this stigma has dissolved faster than anyone expected.
Yeah, and there's a new phrase in the wellness world that I love, which is mind your own body. And what someone else does to find their quiet is really none of my business. And what I do to find my quiet is none of theirs. So that might be one of the most radical wellness pieces of advice that I've heard lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is really that they're not pursuing vanity. They're pursuing this sense of quiet. And the effects people are reporting, Libby, go way beyond the scale.
Yeah, that's right. 43% report decreased food noise, which is those obsessive thoughts about eating. But 50% are eating less processed food, and 44% are eating more high-quality natural food.
But Libby, here's where it gets wild. Millennials are reporting decreases in doomscrolling, gambling, alcohol, right? For Gen Z, 31% are reporting reducing gambling urges. These aren't really just weight-related behaviors.
Yes, and so not only are people experiencing that who are on the drugs, but over half of millennials say they would take a GLP-1 if they were confident it could help with an addiction outside of weight loss, including the gambling, the gaming, and the social media.
It's so interesting to me because it seems like they're not really asking for a diet pill. They're kind of asking for a volume knob, right?
Yeah. So, John, explain what this great quiet means.
So scientists describe what GLP-1s are doing is turning down the gain on the reward circuitry in the brain.
Which means all these compulsions, the overeating, the scrolling, the betting, the shopping, the drinking, the ones we treat as separate weaknesses, separate failures, they might have always been connected to our brain, right, John?
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting you talk about separate weaknesses and failures. It's the same noise, right? It's different targets. In a sense, we've moralized it, we've monetized it, and we blamed ourselves for it. Massive industries have been built. Libby, the diet industry, digital detox, self-help, addiction treatment. Each one is framing the same underlying signal as a different moral failure.
It's interesting to think about that it was never really our own personal character flaw.
Right. It was noise. And noise, it turns out, can be turned down. And really, Libby, once you see the great quiet, you start to see industries already reshaping around it.
When we looked at restaurants, we saw they're rethinking everything. You look at the Olive Garden, Chipotle, Blaze Pizza, they're all developing options for people who eat less but need more nutrition per bite. So that's why protein is all the rage right now.
Oh, totally. And the food and beverage industry has seen something like 42% growth in launches with gut and digestive health claims.
And what's striking is even airlines are quietly factoring weight changes into fuel calculations.
That's crazy.
For example, a Jefferies study found that 4 major U.S. carriers could save a combined $580 million annually as passenger weight shifts.
$580 million from people getting quieter and lighter.
Isn't that nuts? And then Weight Watchers reimagined its entire model around GLP-1s to integrate and support a more holistic approach, not really fighting the wave, but riding it.
Yeah, and when you think about the pipeline, it's absolutely staggering, right? So now we're in the GLP-3 phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got new drugs like retatrutide, Carasigma, Maritide. Each of these are promising to quiet that noise even further. And I think the access barriers are falling fast too, right? The Wegovy pill launched in January at $149 a month for lower doses.
Yeah, and what's interesting and cool about that is 48% of Americans say they would try a GLP-1 if it was available in a pill form, and now it is.
Well, I think why the great quiet is a right now story really comes out of our data. 41% of millennials told us that price alone was the barrier. If the price drops to $200 a month, I'd take it.
Yeah, with pills on the market and insurance mandates expanding coverage, the barrier is dissolving. The cohort waiting on the sidelines is about to move.
Yeah, and the generation leading this isn't who you'd expect. Millennials, the people who came of age during the wellness boom, Libby, that you talked about, those folks who shelled out $300 for boutique gym memberships or who earnestly debate whether red light therapy works.
Yeah, they've tried everything. The cleanses, the trackers, the 5 a.m. routines, the cold plunges.
Yeah, and now they're discovering that the thing that actually helps is the medicine that quiets the noise they've been white-knuckling against for years. It seems, Libby, the try harder era is ending.
Thank God. Just kidding. But also, yeah, it's because people have seen the data and they know biology plays a role. They're increasingly skeptical of messaging that frames struggle as a moral failure.
Yeah, and Libby, we've seen in our Harris poll data 5 years of stacked crises. So you're putting one more thing on top of people that are absolutely overwhelmed. But you know what? Why don't we pause and let's talk about what this means for brands right now? I guess because if I'm a CMO listening to this, my customer just walked past my store and felt nothing. Not resistance, not discipline, nothing. And the craving that used to pull them through my door just evaporated. Where does my brand go from here?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. The thing that you'd want to unpack and understand is how much does your brand create that I can't help myself desire? So if your business model is built on any compulsion, you need to start rethinking and reorganizing how else do I meaningfully show up in people's life, right, John?
No, absolutely. And if we talked about the try harder era ending, parents are interesting in this whole thing. They're the unexpected power users, right? There's 64% adoption and consideration among parents of kids under 18. And I think they're not chasing aesthetics, they're chasing functionality. So marketing that speaks to exhausted caregivers finally addressing their own needs might resonate deeply.
Yeah, and I think that's just a really strong point overall. This is about functionality. The winners that win in this won't fight the quiet. They'll redesign for it. It's interesting to watch the restaurants who are already pivoting to protein density for smaller, more nutritious portions. But it's not about hoping that people won't be on GLP-1s in the future. It's okay, so then where is the design challenge and how are you going to meet this moment and these people in a post-try hard era where there's no moral justifications for all the things that we desire? And maybe quite possibly, if you want to take the most optimistic lens on, this will give us more opportunity to aspire towards the things we actually want and hope for as humans and as people within communities. So I think that's like the most opportunistic lens of getting free time and free space back into your life and brands that support that.
Oh, I love that, Libby. I mean, don't you think that what these pills are really about and what people are telling us in the data is that there's a gateway for esteem, right? And that esteem is unlocking reappraisal of a whole bunch of things in your life. How would you explain all the other knock-on effects in industries, right? You've seen how this has worked its way into the clothing industry, for example. I mean, have you seen other examples like that?
Yeah, no, it's hitting everything from clothing to hospitality to how we think about how we spend our time. I think this is an interesting post-pandemic value shift from when we were in the pandemic, John. We saw this giant shift towards intentionality, and we want to be more intentional as humans, and we're looking for these pathways. And perhaps this medicine is one way to reclaim that time and that intentionality about how we go about our lives in a more meaningful way. So I think brands that figure out what people aspire to and how they want to live and then connect on that, they will be the long-term winners as people get more quiet and this pull subsides a bit.
So I get this sense, Libby, what you're saying. You're talking about quiet. You're talking about hopefulness, optimism. You know, we saw in our data, 48% of Americans say they'd try a GLP-1 in pill form. Now that it's available at that $149 price point, the cohort sort of waiting on the sidelines is about to flood the market. So it's not just weight loss. It's what's your business? How's your brand thinking and being ready for a group of people who simply don't crave anymore?
That's right. And so here's what the great quiet really means. We've spent decades building entire industries around managing this noise.
Yeah, and we're discovering now that the noise was never a character flaw.
No, it was just noise.
And now there's a volume knob. So remember, the great quiet, your customers are getting quieter brains, and businesses built on noise are about to hear the silence.
And a dinner stat for you is 64% of parents with young kids are taking or considering GLP-1s, not for vanity, but for functionality.
Because for decades, we treated compulsion as this moral failure, and it turns out it was just biology with the volume up.
That's right.
I'm John Gersma.
I'm Libby Rodney. Thanks for listening to So Get This. So Get This.
So Get This is a Bubbler Media iHeart podcast production.